I will ask again, how did Joe know what Craig Curtis, the privacy officer at Loma Linda VAMC, looks like? How did Joe know visually what Craig Curtis looks like? I need that question answered. The very guardrails, which I thought would keep Joe on the straight and narrow, fell away in mid-August 2017 when I agreed to accompany him to a Phoenix, Arizona on a work trip. Those guardrails were his son and the custody hearing. The trip was 5 days, drive out Sunday, drive back Friday. On Wednesday, Joe took me to a shooting range. I had not handled a weapon in at least 20 years at that point. In fact, the last time I handled a weapon, I did not require glasses because my vision was perfect. Not anymore. Don't get me wrong, I hit the target. I just can't hit center mass. When we returned to the hotel, we jumped into the pool jacuzzi for a bit. At some point, Joe left the pool and went down the hotel hallway where his wet feet slipped on the tile floor. He made a huge deal of the situation, even filing a claim with the hotel. This action threw me for a loop because he was legitimately placing me in his company in Phoenix at the hotel. He was leaving a paper trail. This was definitely a departure from the Las Vegas blueprint. It wasn't until Thursday afternoon before we headed back to California that Joe insisted we eat dinner at a specific barbecue spot he had heard of, which had 2 locations in Phoenix. One location was approximately 5 to 7 minutes from the hotel. The other location was a 45-minute drive from the hotel. Joe chose the 45-minute drive. I was oblivious at this point. The trip had been so uneventful, and then Joe established the paper trail. I wasn't even paying attention to where we were going until we pulled off the freeway and I saw the signs for Luke Air Force Base. I immediately became alert and on guard, and then we turned into the restaurant parking lot. I knew exactly where we were, and I panicked. True visceral fear. I couldn't talk at first and just sat in the passenger seat, silent, breathing heavy. I asked Joe what was going on. He laughed and got out of the Jeep and came to the passenger side to open my door. I asked him again what was going on. What was he doing? His demeanor was so calm, so detached, it made my panic rise even higher. I was standing in the parking lot of the restaurant where 35 years earlier, I was escorted from having dinner with my unit while on deployment to Luke Air Force Base, back to the unit hotel in Phoenix, and delivered to JD, where the rapes and abuse would continue. It was the only time in the 2 years JD abused me that I begged the weapons technicians not to take me back, that they knew what he was doing and they were participating. Clearly, one of those 2 weapon technicians were tracked down, and his guilty conscience finally forced him to tell the truth. Somewhere out there is a witness who knew exactly what JD was doing back in 1989, and Joe had that information. In Las Vegas, it was a U.S. Air Force veteran in the role of IT data security and compliance who challenged my DD-214 and set off a stolen valor investigation. In Loma Linda, it was yet another Air Force veteran in the privacy office who denied my data, was intentionally altered. And now, an Air Force Reserve veteran had information on a witness to my abuse in Phoenix. We made it back to California in one piece, but I spent the next 2 weeks away from Joe. He called and texted often at first, and then it intensified. Apparently he missed some data in Phoenix, so he was coming in for a second round. I had other plans. Now that Joe had confirmed my VA claim, found a witness, and connected everything back to me, I decided that Joe had to be related to a man from the 33rd AMU, Shaw Air Force Base in South Carolina, who knew I squeaked past the VA claims unit. I finally went to visit Joe, and I confronted him about everything. I went home, and the next day Joe called to ask me to come get the remainder of his things at his apartment. I agreed, and when I arrived, he had a female friend there. Through the back and forth, Joe was obtaining a restraining order. I was delighted. We were getting this whole thing into court. But when the court date came and I arrived at the courthouse, there was no judge. The case was assigned to an administrative, contracted, appointed attorney. I realized this was a farce as I stood outside the courtroom and decided to make a scene. And I did. My goal was to keep Joe on a paper trail, which would require him to explain how he got himself into the mess in the first place. Let him explain to friends and family what was happening. The sideways stalking of a woman veteran, all because he wanted to be special. In the end, Joe spent money on an attorney while in the middle of paying for a divorce. I left my mark. I can legitimately say not another veteran came near me on a sideways quest until I arrived in Louisville, Kentucky.